Natalie Fenton. In 1999, New Zealand witnessed one of its youngest offenders commit an act that would shock the nation. Natalie Fenton, just 14 years old, participated in the fatal stabbing of 22-year-old Peter Crane. The case exposed how teenage thrill-seeking could escalate into irreversible tragedy. Fenton and a 15-year-old accomplice lured Crane to a park where they attacked her with knives. Crane was stabbed over 20 times before being left to die. The brutality of the attack suggested either rage or complete emotional detachment during the assault. The multiple wounds indicated sustained effort rather than a single panicked moment. The motive remained somewhat unclear, though investigators believed robbery or thrill-seeking played roles. Fenton had a troubled background, with early involvement in criminal activity, suggesting a pattern of escalating behavior before the fatal encounter. The attack on Crane represented the culmination of antisocial tendencies that hadn't been successfully addressed. How did authorities connect Fenton to the crime? Police investigations identified witnesses who had seen the teenagers with Crane before her body was discovered. Physical evidence from the scene linked both attackers to the location. When questioned, the evidence proved overwhelming, leading to arrests of both Fenton and her accomplice. The trial in 2000 resulted in a conviction on charges related to Crane's death. At 14, Fenton became one of New Zealand's youngest individuals convicted of such a serious offense. The case raised questions about how the justice system should handle offenders barely into their teenage years, who commit acts typically associated with hardened criminals. Fenton was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years. The relatively short minimum reflected her youth at the time of offense, though the life sentence acknowledged the severity of taking Crane's life. New Zealand's approach attempted to balance accountability with recognition of developmental factors affecting teenage decision-making. During her incarceration, Fenton experienced circumstances that would complicate her life further. She had a son while in prison, and that child witnessed aftermath of another incident involving Fenton, creating intergenerational trauma. The son would later develop his own criminal patterns, illustrating how incarcerated parents' circumstances can affect their offspring. In 2016, after serving 17 years, Fenton was released on parole. The decision sparked controversy, particularly from Crane's family, who had serious concerns about Fenton's reintegration into society. They believed insufficient time had passed for genuine rehabilitation and feared for public safety. Crane's family stated, "She will reoffend, we're sure," expressing their conviction that Fenton remained dangerous despite completing her minimum sentence. Their concerns reflected not just grief over losing Peter, but genuine worry based on their assessment of Fenton's character and lack of remorse. As of recent years, information about Fenton's activities post-release remains limited in public records. Whether she has successfully reintegrated or whether her family's fears were justified remains largely unknown outside official channels that monitor released offenders. The next case would take us to Scotland, where a party turned deadly. Jolene Doherty. In January 2018, a house party in Holytown, Scotland, ended with 18-year-old Connor Cowper bleeding to death from a neck wound. The person responsible was 17-year-old Jolene Doherty, who was pregnant at the time and heavily intoxicated on cocaine and alcohol. The case would make her one of Scotland's youngest convicted in such circumstances. Cowper had called Doherty a stupid wee girl during the party, an insult that would prove fatal. Doherty's reaction was immediate and extreme. She stabbed him in the neck. Cowper was essentially a stranger to her, making the attack even more shocking. The lack of prior relationship meant this wasn't about accumulated grievances, but rather instantaneous rage. The party setting meant multiple witnesses observed what occurred. Attendees provided statements describing the confrontation and stabbing, creating a clear picture of events. The combination of witness testimony and physical evidence made Doherty's involvement undeniable. She confessed to the act, acknowledging she had stabbed Cowper during the altercation. What made this teenager capable of such violence? Doherty was under the influence of both cocaine and alcohol when the incident occurred, substances that impaired her judgment and lowered inhibitions. However, the drugs and alcohol didn't create violent tendencies from nothing. They removed filters that normally prevent people from acting on aggressive impulses. The combination of intoxication, access to a weapon, and an insult created deadly circumstances. The trial highlighted Doherty's apparent lack of empathy for what she had done. Evaluations suggested she didn't fully grasp the permanence of taking Cowper's life, showing emotional disconnection from the consequences. This detachment disturbed observers who expected at least some remorse from someone so young. The judge noted during sentencing, "You were high on drugs and had access to a weapon," emphasizing how these factors combined to create the fatal situation. The statement captured how individual poor choices, drug use, weapon carrying, intersected to produce tragedy that might have been avoided if any single factor had been different. Doherty was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, becoming one of Scotland's youngest convicted in such serious circumstances. The life sentence reflected both the gravity of taking Cowper's life and society's determination to hold even young offenders accountable for deadly actions. Scottish law, like many jurisdictions, treats certain crimes as serious regardless of the perpetrator's age. Her pregnancy at the time of both the offense and trial added complexity to the case. Questions arose about what would happen to her offspring once born, whether she would raise the child from prison, and how her incarceration would affect that young person's development. The situation created another victim, a child who would grow up knowing their mother was imprisoned for taking a life. Cowper's mother expressed devastation, stating she was glad I've not got any more kids, due to fears about youth knife crime. Her words reflected how one family's tragedy rippled outward, affecting her perspective on society and safety. The loss of Connor changed not just her life, but her entire worldview about the dangers young people face. Doherty remains incarcerated in Scotland, serving her life sentence. Another case would involve a daughter and her father, Crystal Howell. In July 2014, Michael Howell took a nap in his North Carolina home, a routine afternoon rest that would prove fatal. His 17-year-old daughter, Crystal, shot him in the head while he slept on the couch. What followed would shock investigators. Crystal hid her father's body in a shed and proceeded to use his house for parties for months. The shooting appeared impulsive, according to Crystal's later statements, though the planning required to hide the body and maintain the deception suggested more calculation than momentary loss of control. She wrapped Michael's body and stored it in a shed on the property, then continued living in the house as if nothing had happened. For months, Crystal hosted parties and used her father's vehicle and belongings. Guests who attended these gatherings had no idea Michael's body was stored just feet away. She spent money from his accounts and maintained appearances that he was alive, creating stories about his whereabouts when people asked about him. How did the discovery finally occur? Party guests eventually stumbled upon Michael's body in the shed. The discovery triggered immediate police involvement and Crystal's arrest. She was found driving Michael's vehicle when authorities located her, having fled after the body was found. Physical evidence from the scene and the shed connected her to both the shooting and the concealment. During interrogation, Crystal cited mental health struggles and described the shooting as happening so fast, like an impulse. Her statement attempted to characterize the act as unplanned, though prosecutors argued that hiding the body and using his estate demonstrated awareness of wrongdoing and deliberate choices to continue benefiting from his death. The investigation revealed no clear motive beyond the vague references to impulse and mental health issues. Unlike cases where financial gain or escape from strict parenting drive offspring to harm parents, Crystal's reasoning remained murky. She hadn't been in immediate danger, wasn't prevented from leaving, and stood to gain little materially from Michael's death that she couldn't have accessed by other means. Crystal pleaded guilty to charges related to her father's death, avoiding trial. The guilty plea acknowledged her responsibility while allowing her to avoid the process of having prosecutors present detailed evidence of her actions. For Michael's extended family, the plea provided some accountability without requiring them to endure a lengthy trial. In 2023, Crystal was sentenced to 30 years in prison with additional time for related charges. The sentence meant she would be in her late 40s at minimum before any possibility of release. North Carolina's sentencing reflected both the shooting itself and her actions afterward, the parties, the spending, the months of deception. Years later, Crystal broke her silence in media interviews, discussing the case from her perspective. She described struggling with mental health issues that weren't adequately addressed before the shooting. Her statements attempted to provide context, though they couldn't justify or undo what occurred. Crystal remains incarcerated in North Carolina, serving her 30-year sentence. But the next case would involve a young victim in the UK. Killing of Katie Ruff. In January 2017, York, England experienced a tragedy that would raise difficult questions about mental illness and criminal responsibility. A 15-year-old girl, whose identity remains protected under UK law, ended the life of 7-year-old Katie Ruff through suffocation and post-incident actions. The case exposed the intersection of severe mental illness and deadly intent. The perpetrator suffered from psychosis and delusions that distorted her perception of reality. Mental health evaluations revealed she experienced thoughts that she believed required action, though the specific content of these delusions wasn't fully disclosed to protect both her privacy and prevent copycat situations. The delusions were severe enough to affect her judgment, but not so complete that she couldn't plan and execute the attack. Katie was targeted in what appeared to be both premeditated and opportunistic. The teenager had thought about harming someone, but selected Katie as the specific victim based on availability and vulnerability. The combination of planning with opportunistic victim selection made the case particularly disturbing. What happened after Katie's death? The perpetrator called emergency services herself, confessing to what she had done. Her immediate report to authorities suggested either overwhelming guilt or recognition that concealment was impossible. The confession provided investigators with information about the attack and the teenager's state of mind. Medical examination confirmed Katie died from suffocation. Additional actions taken after death raised questions about the perpetrator's mindset and whether these were driven by delusions or other factors. The forensic evidence supported the confession's account of events. Mental health became the central focus of legal proceedings. Defense attorneys emphasized that the teenager was extremely troubled and suffering from genuine psychiatric conditions that affected her capacity. They didn't deny she caused Katie's death, but argued mental illness should be considered in determining culpability and appropriate response. The teenager pleaded guilty to manslaughter rather than the more serious charge, acknowledging her role while the plea reflected recognition of her diminished capacity due to mental illness. The manslaughter plea allowed the court to focus on appropriate sentencing given her psychological state, rather than debating whether she met the full legal standard for conviction on the higher charge. In November 2017, she was sentenced to life detention with a minimum term of 5 years before parole consideration. The relatively short minimum reflected her youth, mental illness, and the court's determination that she required treatment more than pure punishment. The life component meant she would remain under supervision indefinitely, with release dependent on demonstrating she no longer posed danger. For Katie Ruff's family, the sentence sparked mixed reactions. Some viewed the minimum term as too lenient for taking a young life, while others acknowledged that mental illness complicated straightforward notions of justice. The family had to process not just Katie's loss, but also the knowledge that her death resulted from another young person's psychiatric breakdown. The perpetrator remains in secure mental health detention in the UK, receiving treatment for her conditions while serving her sentence. Her eventual release will depend on psychiatric evaluations determining she no longer represents a risk. Another case would cross the Atlantic to Alaska.
Fletcher, who was convicted as a teenager for the murder of Ann Faccio and Emma Elliott in 1985, will now have her prison sentence reconsidered after a decision from the Alaska Court of Appeals. Good evening.
Winona Fletcher. In 2000, Alaska witnessed 16-year-old Winona Fletcher become the youngest female convicted in the state's history for her role in ending someone's life. The case would span decades through Alaska's justice system, as courts grappled with how to handle someone so young, convicted of such serious actions. Fletcher participated in an incident that resulted in a death, though specific details about her exact role and the victim have limited availability in public records. What is clear is that her conviction at 16 made her conviction historic for Alaska's justice system, creating precedent about handling juvenile offenders. The original sentencing reflected Alaska's approach at the time to serious juvenile offenses. Fletcher received a lengthy term that would keep her incarcerated well into adulthood. For years, she served her sentence in Alaska's correctional system, aging from teenager to adult while behind bars. How did her case evolve over time? Legal changes affecting juvenile sentencing created opportunities for Fletcher to seek resentencing. Supreme Court decisions about juvenile life sentences prompted reviews of cases where offenders were minors at the time of their crimes. These rulings reflected evolving understanding of adolescent brain development and capacity for rehabilitation. In September 2025, Fletcher appeared for resentencing, seeking a reduced sentence based on her youth at the time of offense and her conduct during decades of incarceration. The proceedings examined whether she had been rehabilitated and whether continued incarceration served any purpose beyond punishment. The judge ultimately ordered Fletcher's release, determining she had served sufficient time given her age at offense and her behavior while imprisoned. The decision considered the 25 years she had spent incarcerated, her participation in programs and evaluations suggesting she no longer posed significant risk to public safety. The resentencing created a battle over Fletcher's future, with prosecutors arguing she should remain imprisoned, while defense attorneys emphasized rehabilitation potential and the excessive nature of her original sentence for someone who was 16 at the time. The competing arguments reflected broader debates about juvenile justice. For the victim's family, Fletcher's release represented another loss. They had expected her to remain imprisoned for life and struggled with the court's determination that she deserved freedom. Victim impact statements described ongoing grief and concern about Fletcher being released back into society. Fletcher's future remains uncertain as she adjusts to life outside prison after spending her entire adult life incarcerated. The skills needed to navigate modern society differ dramatically from those in 2000 when she entered prison. Support systems and monitoring will be crucial in determining whether her release proves successful. The next case would involve a tragic incident in Delaware. Annika Stalczynski. In October 2020, Delaware experienced a tragedy involving teenagers that would result in multiple prosecutions. Annika Stalczynski, then 16, participated in circumstances that led to the death of Madison Sparrow. The case exposed how teenage relationships and conflicts can escalate to fatal outcomes. Stalczynski was involved with Noah Sharp in an incident targeting Sparrow, a former friend whose relationship with Stalczynski had deteriorated. The motive appeared connected to interpersonal conflicts typical of teenage social dynamics, but with deadly escalation. What should have remained verbal disputes or ended friendships instead became fatal. The method used to end Sparrow's life involved actions that demonstrated planning rather than spontaneous rage. Sharp and Stalczynski worked together, with both participating in the attack. The coordination between them showed this wasn't an isolated decision by one person, but rather a jointly executed plan. What evidence connected Stalczynski to Sparrow's death? Forensic evidence from the scene established what occurred and who was present. Witness testimony, including from individuals who knew about the plan, provided additional information about premeditation and execution. Digital communications between Stalczynski, Sharp, and others revealed discussions about their intentions toward Sparrow. Stalczynski's former friend testified during proceedings, providing insider perspective on the relationships and conflicts that preceded Sparrow's death. The testimony described how tensions escalated and how the plan developed. The witness accounts painted a picture of deteriorating friendships that spiraled toward tragedy. Both Stalczynski and Sharp faced trial in Delaware. In October 2022, guilty verdicts were secured against both, with the jury determining they bore responsibility for Sparrow's death. The convictions reflected the strength of evidence demonstrating their joint participation. Stalczynski's sentence reflected her youth at the time of offense, while acknowledging the severity of taking Sparrow's life. Delaware's justice system balanced these competing considerations, resulting in a lengthy term, but one that provided eventual possibility of release, unlike some jurisdictions that impose true life without parole on juveniles. Sharp received his own conviction and sentence for his role as a co-participant. The separate proceedings allowed courts to evaluate each person's individual culpability while acknowledging they worked together. The sentences reflected Delaware's determination that both bore significant responsibility regardless of who played which specific role. For Sparrow's family, the convictions provided accountability but couldn't restore their daughter. They had lost someone young with their entire future ahead of them over teenage conflicts that should have been resolved through normal social processes rather than deadly confrontation. Victim impact statements described permanent grief and the void left by Sparrow's absence. Stalczynski remains incarcerated in Delaware, serving her sentence. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Another case would involve a mother-daughter conflict in Ohio. Mindy Barany. In 1989, Ohio witnessed a case that divided opinion about whether a teenager acted in self-defense or committed premeditated harm. Mindy Barany, at 17, shot and ended the life of her mother, Marie Poling. The circumstances surrounding the shooting would spark debate about parental treatment and teenage responses that last decades. Barany claimed her mother had created an intolerable home environment. She described years of difficulties that she said drove her to desperate measures, though family members disputed these characterizations. The conflicting accounts made determining the truth difficult, with Mindy's version contrasting sharply with how other relatives remembered Marie. On the day of the shooting, Mindy used a firearm to end her mother's life. The location and circumstances of the shooting became crucial evidence in determining whether this was self-defense, as Mindy claimed, or something more calculated. Forensic analysis examined the physical evidence to reconstruct what occurred. The investigation revealed details that complicated Mindy's self-defense narrative. Evidence suggested planning rather than spontaneous reaction to immediate threat. The positioning of Marie's body, the trajectory of the shot, and other forensic details raised questions about whether Mindy faced imminent danger at the moment she fired. Family members took opposing positions on Mindy's culpability. Some supported her claims about Marie's treatment and viewed the shooting as tragic but understandable given alleged circumstances. Others defended Marie's character and insisted Mindy's accusations were fabrications designed to justify premeditated harm. The family division meant there was no unified narrative about what happened or why. What did the courts determine? Mindy was convicted on charges related to her mother's death, with the jury rejecting her self-defense claims. The verdict reflected their determination that evidence didn't support immediate danger requiring deadly force. Ohio's legal standards for self-defense are strict, requiring reasonable belief of imminent harm that can only be stopped through force used. Berenyi was sentenced to a lengthy prison term that would keep her incarcerated for decades. The sentence balanced her youth at the time of offense against the severity of taking her mother's life. Ohio's approach reflected determination to hold her accountable while acknowledging developmental factors. Appeals followed, with Mindy's legal team challenging various aspects of her conviction and sentence. The appeals process examined whether she received fair trial and appropriate sentence given her age. Multiple levels of Ohio courts reviewed the case, generally upholding the conviction while occasionally modifying sentence details. During her incarceration, Mindy maintained her version of events. She continued asserting that Marie's treatment drove her to act and that she genuinely believed she was in danger. The consistency of her narrative over decades suggested either genuine belief in her version or determination to maintain the self-defense story regardless of evidence. Years into her sentence, questions remained about what truly motivated the shooting. Was it years of accumulated resentment that Mindy genuinely believed justified her actions? Was it teenage rebellion taken to an extreme? Or was it calculated harm for reasons Mindy never fully disclosed? The answers likely died with Marie. Mindy served decades in Ohio's correctional system before any release considerations. Her case highlighted how family conflicts, when they escalate beyond normal bounds, can produce tragedies that destroy multiple lives. Whether victim or perpetrator, or some complex combination, Mindy's teenage choice ensured she would spend most of her adult life imprisoned. While that case involved disputed family dynamics, the next would expose clear intent. Meredith Poling. In 2000, Trumbull County, Ohio experienced another mother-daughter tragedy when Meredith Poling, the sister of the aforementioned Marie, faced her own daughter's actions. However, Meredith's case details are limited in public records, with the primary available information relating to the broader family tragedy that affected multiple generations. What is documented suggests that Meredith became entangled in family circumstances that had already produced one death. The Poling family faced recurring issues across generations, with patterns of conflict escalating to harm. The intergenerational nature of family dysfunction raised questions about whether cycles could be broken or if destructive patterns inevitably repeated. Meredith's relationship with her daughter appears to have been troubled, mirroring in some ways the difficulties that plagued other family branches. Financial stress, communication breakdowns, and accumulating resentments created volatile household dynamics. These factors, common in many families, occasionally escalate beyond verbal conflict into physical confrontation. The specific circumstances of what occurred in Meredith's household remain somewhat unclear in available sources. What is evident is that her daughter faced legal consequences for actions taken within their home. The Ohio justice system intervened, examining evidence and determining appropriate accountability. How did this case differ from her sister Marie's situation? While both involved mother-daughter conflicts reaching extreme outcomes, the specifics of evidence, claimed justifications, and ultimate legal determinations varied. Each case required individual evaluation rather than treating them as identical simply because they occurred in related family branches. Ohio courts examined the particular facts of Meredith's situation separately. The parallel tragedies within one extended family prompted discussions about whether genetic or environmental factors contributed to repeated patterns. Mental health professionals examined whether family-wide dysfunction suggested treatable conditions that, if addressed earlier, might have prevented escalation. However, such analysis necessarily remained speculative without full access to family medical and psychological histories. In 2025, Meredith Poling died while still incarcerated, never experiencing freedom after her conviction. Her death in prison meant she served the entirety of her remaining life behind bars. For her family, the death represented another loss layered on top of the tragedy that initially resulted in her incarceration. Another case would involve a Florida teenager and her mother.
In 1998, Vicki Robinson was brutally killed in one of the most high-profile murders this area's ever seen. 3 people, including Robinson's own daughter, Valessa, just 15 years old at the time, were convicted. But within hours, that formerly long-haired teen will be released from prison earlier than expected. And tonight, Robinson's friends can't help but feel conflicted.
Valessa Robinson. In June 1998, Tampa, Florida witnessed a case that shocked the community. Valessa Robinson, 15, participated with her boyfriend in ending her mother Vicki's life. The case exposed how teenage romantic relationships can lead to devastating choices when combined with drug use and parental conflict. Vicki Robinson's body was discovered in a van, having been placed there after being harmed in the family home. The discovery triggered an investigation that quickly focused on Valessa and her boyfriend Adam Davis, who had fled. The couple's flight suggested consciousness of guilt, though they would later claim other motivations for leaving. Valessa's relationship with her mother had been contentious. Vicki disapproved of Valessa's boyfriend and drug use, creating ongoing conflict in their household. The typical mother-teenager disputes about autonomy and choices had escalated beyond normal bounds, with Vicki attempting to control Valessa's associations and activities. The influence of Adam Davis proved significant in what occurred. He was older and involved with substances, representing the dangerous relationship Vicki feared. Davis encouraged and participated in actions against Vicki, with evidence suggesting he played a leading role while Valessa followed along. However, prosecutors argued that following along still constituted criminal participation. What evidence demonstrated Valessa's involvement? Physical evidence from the scene connected both Valessa and Davis to what occurred. Forensic analysis established timeline and method used to end Vicki's life. Witness testimony described the couple's behavior before and after, including their flight and attempts to evade capture. The trial became highly publicized in Florida, with media coverage focusing on the young age of the perpetrators and the mother-daughter relationship destroyed. Valessa was convicted on charges related to her mother's death, with the jury determining she bore criminal responsibility despite her youth and Davis's influence. The verdict reflected their conclusion that she participated actively rather than being merely present. Valessa was initially sentenced to life imprisonment, a term that would have kept her incarcerated indefinitely. However, Florida's approach to juvenile sentencing evolved over subsequent years. Legal changes affecting those who were minors at the time of their offenses created opportunities for sentence review and possible reduction. After serving years, Valessa was released from prison following resentencing that reduced her term. The release came after evaluations suggesting she had been rehabilitated and no longer posed significant danger. Florida's parole system determined that continued incarceration served no purpose given her progress and changed circumstances. Life after release proved challenging for Valessa. She had entered prison as a teenager and emerged as an adult, having missed crucial developmental years. She eventually became a mother herself, experiencing parenthood from the opposite side of the mother-daughter relationship she destroyed. The irony of raising offspring while having taken her own mother's life wasn't lost on observers. For Vicki Robinson's family, Valessa's release reopened wounds. They had lost Vicki to her own daughter's actions and struggled with the knowledge that Valessa now lived freely. Victim impact statements during resentencing described permanent loss and concern about justice being served with a reduced sentence. But another case would involve a New Year's Eve discovery in New York. Destiny Sanchez. On New Year's Day 2016, New York City police discovered two bodies in a Brooklyn apartment. The victims were 38-year-old Rosie Sanchez and her boyfriend. The person responsible was Rosie's 15-year-old daughter, Destiny Sanchez, who had ended both lives, then spent New Year's Eve partying in Times Square while the bodies remained in the apartment. Destiny initially claimed she had been experiencing mistreatment that drove her to act, allegations that a relative immediately disputed. The relative stated Destiny was lying about the claimed mistreatment, insisting Rosie had been a caring mother. The conflicting accounts made determining truth difficult, with Destiny's version challenged by those who knew the family. The method and timing of the acts suggested planning rather than spontaneous defensive reaction. Destiny had time to end both lives, leave the apartment, and participate in New Year's Eve celebrations. She was captured on video footage in Times Square during the iconic ball drop celebration, appearing to enjoy herself while two bodies lay in her home. The disconnect between celebrating and what awaited her return home disturbed investigators. How did authorities discover what occurred? Someone who knew the family contacted police when unable to reach Rosie. Officers performed a wellness check at the apartment and discovered both bodies. The scene indicated both victims had been deceased for some time. Evidence at the scene connected Destiny to the deaths. When questioned, Destiny initially maintained her story about reacting to mistreatment. However, physical evidence contradicted aspects of her account. The forensic details suggested the victims hadn't been engaged in actions Destiny claimed necessitated her response. The evidence indicated they had been caught off guard rather than posing imminent threats. Family members who disputed Destiny's allegations emphasized that Rosie had been a good mother, working to provide for her daughter and maintain their home. They described normal mother-teenager conflicts, but nothing approaching what Destiny alleged. The relatives' certainty that Destiny fabricated justifications suggested motivations beyond self-defense. Destiny was charged as a juvenile with counts related to both deaths. New York's juvenile justice system faced the challenge of balancing her age against the serious nature of two lives taken. The decision about whether to try her as an adult or in juvenile court involved weighing various factors, including her maturity, the calculated nature of the acts, and rehabilitation potential. The case drew significant media attention, particularly the detail about her Times Square celebration while bodies remained in her apartment. The image of a teenager enjoying New Year's festivities knowing what awaited at home crystallized public perception of callousness. The timing made the case memorable beyond its already disturbing elements. For Rosie's family and friends, the betrayal by someone Rosie had devoted her life to raising created profound grief. They mourned not just Rosie, but also her boyfriend, who had been incorporated into their family structure. The double loss and the knowledge that destiny caused both deaths left lasting trauma. The legal proceedings examined whether Destiny's youth warranted more lenient treatment or whether the nature of her actions demanded harsh consequences. Mental health evaluations assessed her state of mind and whether psychiatric factors affected her capacity. The evaluations would influence both prosecution strategy and eventual sentencing. Another case would take us to Canada.
Okay, so he phones you and he says, I have a knife with an 8-inch blade and I'm going to Stephanie's house. What was your response to that?
Like, okay, do whatever you want.
And what did that mean? What did you take that to mean when you said that? What did you mean when you said, okay, do whatever you want?
I meant, if you want to kill her, kill her.
Did you say those words?
I said, do whatever you want.
Well, that's not if you want to kill her, kill her.
You said, what did I mean?
So he phones you and he says, I have an 8-inch blade knife and I'm going to Stephanie's house. And your response is, do whatever you want. What did he say to that?
Can't remember.
Did you think of calling 911 and reporting that there was a guy on a delivery to a young girl's house with a knife to kill her?
No.
How come?
I don't know.
Melissa Todorovich. In January 2008, Toronto, Canada experienced a case driven by jealousy that would result in a young life lost. Melissa Todorovich, just 15, orchestrated a plot targeting Stephanie Rengel, a romantic rival. The case exposed how teenage jealousy, when combined with obsessive thinking and manipulation, can escalate to deadly outcomes. Todorovich was fixated on her ex-boyfriend and couldn't accept that he had moved on. When he began a relationship with Stephanie Rengel, Todorovich's jealousy transformed into dangerous obsession. Rather than process the breakup and move forward, she fixated on eliminating what she viewed as an obstacle to rekindling her previous relationship. Todorovich pressured her then-boyfriend David Bagshaw to attack Stephanie, using manipulation and emotional coercion to convince him to act. Over weeks, she sent hundreds of messages pushing him toward the act, wearing down his resistance through persistent pressure. The digital communication trail would later provide prosecutors with clear evidence of premeditation and Todorovich's role as orchestrator. On the night of the attack, Bagshaw stabbed Stephanie multiple times outside her home, following through on what Todorovich had been demanding. Stephanie died from her wounds, a 14-year-old whose life ended because of teenage romantic jealousy. The senseless nature of her death, killed over a boyfriend situation that would have been forgotten within years under normal circumstances, made the tragedy particularly painful. The investigation quickly identified both Todorovich and Bagshaw as responsible. Communications between them provided damning evidence of the plot, with Todorovich's messages showing sustained pressure on Bagshaw to carry out the attack. Text messages, emails, and other digital communications created a timeline of how the plot developed from idea to execution. Both faced charges, with prosecutors arguing that Todorovich bore significant responsibility despite not wielding the weapon herself. She was convicted on charges related to Stephanie's death and sentenced to life imprisonment, making her one of Canada's youngest individuals to receive such a sentence for orchestrating another's death. During incarceration, Todorovich participated in rehabilitation programs aimed at addressing the jealousy and obsessive thinking that drove her actions. Mental health treatment examined her attachment patterns and taught healthier ways of processing relationship disappointments. Her progress during incarceration would later influence parole decisions. After serving years, Todorovich sought parole, arguing she had been rehabilitated and no longer posed danger. Parole board evaluations assessed her risk level, her understanding of what she had done, and whether she had genuinely changed. The evaluations considered both her crime's severity and her progress during imprisonment. In 2018, Todorovich breached parole conditions, resulting in her return to custody. The breach demonstrated that reintegration challenges remained despite apparent progress. Parole officers determined she had violated terms of her release, requiring her to complete additional time in more structured settings. Most recently, in September 2025, Todorovich was granted day parole, allowing her to reside in a halfway house with supervision. The board determined she had made sufficient progress since her previous parole breach and that graduated reintegration with support was appropriate. The parole decision noted she now represented low risk based on current evaluations. For Stephanie Rengel's family, each parole hearing and release decision reopens their grief. They lost Stephanie to teenage jealousy that should never have escalated beyond hurt feelings and social awkwardness. Victim impact statements describe permanent loss and concern that Todorovich receives freedoms Stephanie never will. The final case would involve a politician's daughter in Las Vegas, Sierra Halseth. In April 2021, Las Vegas experienced a case that shocked the community given the prominent nature of the victim's family. Sierra Halseth, 16, and her boyfriend, Aaron Guerrero, attacked Sierra's father, Daniel Halseth, in his home. Daniel was a former Nevada state politician, making the case particularly notable. Daniel was stabbed 70 times in a sustained attack that demonstrated extreme rage or determination. The number of wounds indicated this wasn't a brief confrontation, but rather a prolonged assault. After the stabbing, the couple attempted to burn Daniel's body to destroy evidence, showing awareness they had committed serious crimes. Sierra's relationship with her father had been troubled. Daniel and Sierra's mother had gone through a bitter divorce that affected Sierra's relationship with both parents. The divorce created ongoing tension and conflict that Sierra struggled to navigate. However, her family would later deny that Daniel had done anything warranting such violence. Sierra claimed she had experienced mistreatment that motivated the attack, though family members disputed these allegations. They insisted Daniel had been a caring father despite the difficult divorce. The conflicting accounts made determining the true nature of their relationship challenging for those outside the family. Guerrero's influence on Sierra became a focal point. He had mental health issues and used substances including LSD, factors that affected his judgment and potentially encouraged the violent solution to Sierra's family conflicts. The question of whether Sierra would have acted without Guerrero's involvement remained debated. What evidence sealed their fate? Surveillance video captured the couple fleeing Las Vegas after the attack, driving toward Salt Lake City, where they were eventually apprehended. The flight demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Additional evidence included forensic analysis of the scene, the attempted burning, and digital communications between them discussing their plans. Both Sierra and Guerrero faced trial. In October 2022, they were convicted and sentenced for their roles in Daniel's death. Sierra received life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 22 years, while Guerrero received a similar sentence. Nevada's sentencing balanced their youth against the calculated nature of the attack and attempted cover-up. In 2025, Guerrero gave an interview discussing the case and expressing regret. He stated he and Sierra no longer have contact, suggesting they blame each other or simply want to move past their shared crime. His reflections acknowledged the LSD use and mental health issues affected his decision-making, but didn't fully excuse his participation. Sierra serves her sentence in Nevada prison, facing 22 years before parole eligibility. She will be in her late 30s before any possibility of release, having spent her entire young adulthood imprisoned. The sentence ensures she experiences consequences for decades, while theoretically allowing eventual reintegration if she demonstrates rehabilitation. For Daniel Halseth's family, Sierra's actions represented the ultimate betrayal. They emphasized that Sierra's claims about mistreatment were false, defending Daniel's character and insisting he had been a good father despite the challenging divorce. Their victim impact statements described devastation at losing Daniel to his own daughter's choices. The 70 stab wounds haunted those familiar with the case. Such sustained attacks suggested either extreme rage accumulated over time or complete emotional detachment during the act. Psychologists who examined Sierra attempted to understand what psychological state allowed someone to inflict that many wounds on their own father. The case sparked discussions in Las Vegas about warning signs when teenage romantic relationships become dangerous influences. Schools and community organizations examined how to identify when a boyfriend or girlfriend encourages harmful actions against family members. Sierra's case illustrated how manipulative relationships can lead teenagers to choices they might not make independently. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.